Hey everyone, welcome to the Citizen Sit Down podcast. This is a podcast where we sit down with different leaders and we talk about life and leadership. Today we're sitting down with Alex Wood. Alex is the vicar of Harbour Church in Portsmouth. Harbour Church was planted in 2016 as a church plant from Holy Trinity Brompton and St Peter's Brighton. That church was the fastest growing church within the HTB network and now is the largest church in Portsmouth. Alex is husband to Liz, dad to Annie, and to my goddaughter Florrie. So we're so excited to have Alex on the podcast today. Hope you enjoy. Mate, Alex, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here, Brian. Very excited.
Ryan?
Yes, well, I call you Brian because you're my friend, and that is the name I've chosen for you.
Just so the world knows, my name isn't Ryan, short for Brian.
That is what I declare it to be.
Anyway, great. We're talking about you. So, Alex, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Tell us, let's just jump straight in. Tell us about what it was life was like growing up. What did you always go to church? Did you always plan on being a vicar?
Well, that's where to start, but I definitely didn't grow up going to church. I grew up and we weren't like a church-going family or anything like that. I went to university in Manchester and had what I would sort of describe as a really typical experience of being a student in Manchester. Didn't meet a single Christian the whole time I was there. Actually, apart from one time when we were on a night out in a Scream bar. I don't think they're a thing anymore.
What is a Scream?
It's like
Scream, as in the movie.
Yes, but that's not. That's irrelevant. But yes, they're called Scream bars. Yeah. And we were on a night out and a girl walked in and she asked if, she was like, oh, is this the Christian Union? And I felt really uncomfortable for her. So I sort of thought, oh, I hope you don't, because
this is not the Christian Union.
No. And so that was my only experience of Christianity at university. No experience whatsoever. But my, a mate of mine was a Christian, a guy who I met when I was on summer from university in Swansea. Some of his mates went to church and definitely I noticed something about them, but I didn't really think anything of it. And actually, when I was at university, one Sunday morning after a particularly heavy night out, I decided to go to church. And I think it was because I'd had this experience of meeting this group of Christians in Swansea while I was at home for the summer. And I turned up to church, and I didn't obviously know where to go to church, but I went to the sort of building with the pointy tower, just to sort of like turned up at 10 o'clock in the morning. And a friend of mine from my course decided to come with me. She actually was still on a night out at that time, so she hadn't gone home. And we went in, sat at the back, and I'm sure they were really lovely people. But my experience was that everything I found at that church was irrelevant to my life. It was incredibly, in my opinion, boring. It was boring and irrelevant, and I felt like this just is definitely not the answer to maybe some of the questions that I'm searching for. And then I forgot all about it, moved to London, and actually ended up in a flat share with this guy from Swansea because he moved to London at the same time. And again, he was like a really normal, down-to-earth guy. But every Sunday night he'd go off to church, which meant I'd be on my own in the house. Actually never invited me, which was weird. Until one Sunday, he was like, oh, I'm off to church again. Do you want to come? And I was like, yes, obviously I want to come. Like, why have you not been inviting me? You invite me to everything else you do, to football and everything else. And I went, and I was like, oh, there's something here. But what struck me most was that this guy lived his life in a way and had this sort of character that was really attractive, that he seemed to have this peace and this contentment, but also this security that I didn't have. Even though on paper, I felt like my life should be slightly better than his. I had a slightly better job, but he looked slightly bigger room in the house. And he persuaded me to do Alpha. So I did Alpha at a church in London called HTB. Alpha, if people don't know, is this small group opportunity to discuss questions of life, the meaning of faith, the meaning of life and questions of faith, I'll probably say. And I was really difficult in the group. I just did not believe it. I had no intention of believing it. I wasn't going to be persuaded. Then I had this encounter with Jesus on the Holy Spirit weekend away. Wow. I was filled with the Holy Spirit and it changed my life forever. So that was actually my journey into faith. And then I found a church that felt relevant, felt accessible, felt like it made a difference in my life, felt authentic. So that was like this whole shift actually in my understanding of church and faith happened then when I was in my early 20s.
Would you say that, so you went to this church, and would you say that kind of reinforced your stereotype, I guess, of what?
The one in Manchester?
Yeah,
it did. And I guess that my housemates were like, what on earth were you doing going to church, you weirdo? I got back by 11 and they were like, just getting up. And I was like, I've been to church, boys. And they were like, have you actually? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, you're lying. There's no way. You've not been to church. It's Sunday morning. I was like, I've been to church. Wow. It was terrible.
And so what was it different about this church, this other church that you went to then when you went to London? What's the difference that made you want to keep going back?
I definitely think that churches are good when there's a broad range of them. And perhaps I just went to one that wasn't right for me. And who knows, somebody else could have walked in there and had a really, really positive experience. So I would never want to say that it was a bad church, because I reckon they were probably amazing people. It just didn't connect with my life because the average age was probably late 70s and I was going as a 19-year-old. The talk just didn't impact me in any way. Nobody said hello to me. There was no sort of like invitation or welcome or anything like that. And I just thought, oh, you know what? This just isn't, clearly this isn't for me. And actually I had questions and I had doubts about life, and I thought maybe there's a different way to live life. But going to that church proved to me, in my mind, Christianity doesn't have any of the answers to the questions I'm asking. And so it definitely reinforced, well, church is over here and that's not going to hold any answers for me. And then I looked elsewhere.
Wow. Okay. And so then you worked at the BBC, is that right?
Well, it is right, Ryan. Yeah, thanks for mentioning it.
Tell us about that. How did it go from being at the BBC? I don't know what you did at the BBC, but then to being a vicar. How did that happen?
Well, I finished university, moved to London, started work at the BBC, and it was my dream job. I actually loved it. I got to travel all over the world, making TV programmes, and I really, really loved it. And it was then, while I was working at the BBC, that I got invited to do Alpha. So I started doing Alpha, and Wednesday nights was a bit of a night out for the BBC staff, because in the a building that we were at, there's a BBC bar, and we always used to go out on a Wednesday. So I started doing Alpha on a Wednesday, and it meant that I was missing drinks on a Wednesday evening. So all my BBC friends were like, where on earth are you going? And I used to go, I'm doing this course. It's like a philosophy course. And they were like, what do you mean? At like the university? I was like, yeah, sort of, yeah. And they said, is it like accredited course? I was like, yeah, get a certificate at the end. Because I was just so embarrassed. I was doing Alpha, I was doing this thing called Alpha. But then actually, I found this faith, and it changed everything in my life because it made me completely turn around in my understanding of who I was, that I was loved, that I was known, and that actually the biggest thing that changed was that I just thought that Christianity was about obeying a certain set of rules, and that your life would make more sense if you could just behave better. And Christianity had this list of rules, probably because I was thinking about the 10 Commandments. There's literally a list of rules. If you abide by those, your life will be slightly better. And what I found is that actually Christianity just isn't primarily about morals, ethics, and rules. It's actually about a relationship. And that changed everything for me. And so my faith actually, I am a bit of an obsessive person, so I get super into stuff. But it turned my life completely around. And then maybe a couple of years later, I was on a church week away with the church that I'd started going to, and one of the pastors there sort of offered me a job. I said, would you consider joining this church staff? And I was like, absolutely not. What a terrible idea. I love my job. And then I felt like God spoke to me and said, I think this might be right. And I sort of sat with it for a couple of weeks, and in the end joined the staff of this church in London.
Wow. And that's the church that that's the church that we were planning from, HTB.
Yes,
is that right?
That's right. Wow. So Liz, I met my wife Liz at HTB. I sort of was on the staff there. While I was there, I felt called to ordination, moved to Brighton, which is a church plant, HTB's first church plant outside of London. They planted in 2009, and we moved down in 2011. Hey, I met you in London. That's where we met.
You met me in London.
You were a student in London while I was working in students. You were a very famous student because you went in church circles, not in the real world, but in church circles, you were a famous student because you were running Alpha for your friends, and you saw some of your friends come to faith.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that was fun. We did a little Alpha on a little ironing board in a halls of residence.
Ironing board Alpha.
It was good fun.
We made videos about your ironing board Alpha.
Oh gosh.
But it was amazing. And then so that's how we met.
Yeah.
And then actually the romance continued when I invited you to move to...
We bumped into each other at the leadership conference.
At the leadership conference. And then you moved to Brighton. We worked together in Brighton. And then in 2016, we were invited to start a church in Portsmouth.
Yeah, I followed you to Portsmouth, which was fun. Tell us about that. So you worked at the BBC. Then you went to become a vicar or a pastor, and then how did church planting come out of that? Talk to us about that a bit.
Well, I felt HTB has this vision to play its part in the re-evangelization of the nation, seeing people who don't know Jesus come to know Jesus, in the revitalization of the church, seeing these ancient ruins that are so often empty and neglected come back to life and be filled with people worshipping and seeing people, the church serving its local community, and then also the transformation of society, seeing us play our part in building a fairer, more just society. But that vision, see the revitalisation of the church, is a vision to plant churches all over the UK into communities where not many people are going to church. So that's sort of what's been going on since the 1980s, and it's really rapidly increased over the last 10 years. And then like in 2009, the first one outside of London to Brighton. And so when I felt called to ordination, it was because actually I heard this vision that what would it look like if churches planted churches that planted churches, and we could see the revitalisation of the church in the UK. And I thought maybe I could play my part in that. If I could like run one of those small churches that's been planted by another church, then that will like be playing my part in seeing that happen. And I thought, well, where better to learn how to do that than HTB's first church plant outside of London in Brighton. So me and my wife, we moved down to Brighton in 2011, I think. And then we were training there, learning everything that we could. A leader there called Archie Coates, who's just the most phenomenal leader. Really, I learned so much from him about church planting, the vision for growing churches and stuff. Don't know if I'm answering your question, but then we decided that, well, it wasn't even that we decided, because it's not like you can say, right, I want to go and plant a church in Portsmouth. I've decided I fancy living by the sea and, I like Pompey Football Club. We were invited by invitation of the bishop, who'd seen what was going on in Brighton. And was like, hey, we want to see the same thing happen in Portsmouth. And he approached Archie and said, do you know anyone who could come and do this in Portsmouth? He said, Alex will go. And I said, what? I quite like my life, thanks, Archie. I've got no But actually, again, same thing happened. We sensed God's call, and we sensed that pull towards church planting and towards Portsmouth. We went to visit, and we went to visit the bishop, and he said, would you consider moving over here and starting something new in Portsmouth? And we said yes, and then we moved over in 2016.
Wow, mate, that's amazing. So you spent about 5 years in Brighton, where you were training for ordination to become a vicar, to become a pastor, and then you were asked to go to Portsmouth. You moved to Portsmouth. What happens there? What is that like when you all of a sudden, you pack up your bags, you've got the removals there, you show up in a city?
Hey, the date that we moved, that was the date you had your first date with your now wife.
That's actually true.
That's actually true. You were living with us. You were on lockdown at the time.
I had an empty house. You took all the furniture. I was sleeping. I had to sleep on like a airbed on the floor of my own little house.
And do you remember you got really sunburned, and you went to your first date with a face like a cherry. You were so badly. I can't believe she married me. I can't believe she married you.
She still married me.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the Lord.
She's kind. We moved over that day with with Liz, who was 8.5 months pregnant, and our 2-year-old daughter. And you're right, it was so daunting then. And also for us, it had been quite a complicated journey, because the bishop asked if we'd church plant, but then when we really started exploring the details, the bishop and the archdeacon, our archdeacon, who's now the Bishop of Stepney, an amazing woman who had this vision for this church plan, showed us different church buildings. But actually, it turned out that the building they had in mind wasn't going to work, because there was a vicar who was there who had a vision, and he was an amazing guy, actually. And it didn't quite work out for us to plant there. So the archdeacon said, we could start in another building. And we found a commercial building, just like an old department store on the high street. And we started worshipping there. And actually, it wasn't always smooth sailing. We imagined that you'd rock up and we'd start this new church and it would fill up immediately. But the journey is much more sort of up and down. It's undulating. There are these moments where it feels so exciting. But then there's also these huge moments of challenge when you really doubt yourself and you feel like you've got it wrong. And for me, one of those moments was I'd led us into this department store, this commercial building
right in the heart of the city centre, isn't it?
And actually with that city centre postcode comes a city centre price, and our rent was going up incrementally, and it really was a huge hit on our finances. And I got to this point where I thought, I've totally messed this up. I've decided to take us to this building, and this is going to ruin the church financially. I don't know what we're going to do. And it was right when we're in the depths of struggling with that financial problem that builders knocked down the building next door to build student accommodation. And they popped in, and really when I was doubting that we should be there at all, they said, we found the old plans to this building. Do you want to see? And we're like, what is it? And they said, funnily enough, it used to be a hotel. And we're like, that's nice. And they said, but on the ground floor, there's a cafe this woman had built a cafe. And we're like, oh, that's funny, because on the ground floor, we have a cafe. And they said, oh, yeah, the cafe was like a social enterprise, and the money was supposed to help vulnerable women and their families. And we're like, well, that's weird, because that's what our cafe does. And this was in 1880. So it was like 140 years before we'd moved there. We're like, that's so incredible. That was the thing. They said, oh, yeah, the other thing on the ground floor of this hotel, there was a church. She built it, and every night of the week she had evangelistic outreach services for the people of Portsmouth who didn't know Jesus.
Wow.
And we're like, it made me think, it's not my church, it's God's church. And he knew all along that he was going to lead us into that building. Actually, he knew that site was earmarked to be a church for hundreds of years. And actually, it's not on us. Like, it's not our job to make it work. God has a vision for the city, and he uses useless people like us to sort of make it happen.
Yeah. Mate, that's amazing. What a story. Yeah, that's incredible. And so you were there at this commercial road location, and that's how you started off. But what has it changed since then? So that was when, 2016? Yeah, 2016
we launched our services in the September, and it was exciting actually. People started coming, and we were sort of having a really good time. And then the bishop had also licensed me, so it made me the vicar of this church over in a suburban area in the east of the city called St Albans. And it was really small number of people that were left there with just a service on a Sunday morning and no midweek activities at all. Yeah. And we started asking ourselves the question of, what does really good church in that area look like? And we knew there were loads of families with children, and so we started running tots and toddlers and a parenting course, and then we launched this new service. Looking back, it was a terrible time to launch it, because it was in the middle of the World Cup in 2018 in June. We launched it at 4:00 in the afternoon on Sundays. I don't know how anybody ever came, because they were all at home watching the football. But we started something which we felt was quite different and quite exciting, and like over 100 people were coming every week to this service, so we felt really excited. And at the same time, the services at our commercial road venue were really growing. And the morning, we hadn't quite factored in that like you could seat probably 300, but when everyone's there with their buggies and like a welcome wall and getting a cup of coffee, that really shrinks. So the morning service outgrew that building quite quickly. And so the bishop then invited us to partner with a church in the dockyard, in the sort of quay side, near a big shopping centre called Gunwharf Quays, where you spent most of your time, Ryan, when you lived in Portsmouth.
Oh my goodness.
Missed those shops.
It's got all the shops. It's got everything. Big up Gunwharf Quays. Come on.
And so we moved our service into this Gunwharf location. So suddenly we found ourselves as one church across 3 locations, which we had no intention to do. And it wasn't like we set out saying we want to like all these multiple buildings, because it's really complicated. But we just felt actually it was God's leading, and that then the services in this Gunwharf Quays church over in the quayside, they grew really rapidly. I don't know why, it was like God was just growing them. So then we had to double up the services there, and then in September 2019, the bishop then asked if we might move our evening service, which again had outgrown this commercial venue, into the church, which was supposed to be the location of the church plant in the first place, because the vicar who was there had really happily retired, and they were looking for somebody to partner with them. So we moved our evening service into this All Saints site. We call it our city location. It's right in the heart of the city. And actually, I remember preaching there for the first time in September 2019, and I looked out and I said, that verse from in the story of Joseph, where his brothers come to see him, and they apologize and they say, "We're so sorry. We shouldn't have thrown you in the pit." I mean, good advice for any brother, throwing their brother into the pit.
A bit harsh, isn't it?
Yeah, selling him into slavery. And Joseph replies and he says, "Oh no, you intended it for harm, but God intended it for good, for the saving of many lives," which is what's happening now. And I looked back when I was preaching in September 2019, I thought, you know what? I thought when we had to give up that idea of being in that building and move into this commercial road location, I felt my mistake. God's abandoned us. Like this is awful. And I looked back and I thought, maybe the devil intended it for harm, but God intended it for good, for what is happening now, which is the saving of many lives. Wow. And you remember, like, it's so encouraging for anyone who's church planting or anybody who's involved in Christian ministry. It's not our church, it's God's church. And also it's not our plan, it's God's plan. And he always works for the good of those who love him. And it's such a relief when, like, especially in these times, trying to like figure out how to do church and coronavirus and everything, knowing God's good and he's got a plan.
Mate, it's coming full circle, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's incredible. And you're still planting. You've got more plants going on. You Can you talk about that?
Yeah. We were planting. So Portsmouth is actually an island. It's like an island city, and then over the.
It's a bit hotter, isn't it? It pokes out a little bit hotter than any other part of the UK.
It's ever so warm down there.
Is it the sunniest part of the UK or something?
Let's just say that. Yeah. Feels that way.
Try it. Check it out.
It's quite windy because of the Solent. Great for sailing. If you're into sailing.
Yeah. It's also lovely water. It's quite still.
Yeah.
Very different to here. It's nice.
Different to Cardiff Bay, perhaps.
A bit different.
Yeah. So actually, the bishop has invited us to play a role in sort of seeing if these 3 churches over in Gosport, if we can help them to flourish and to bring new life and build a new worshipping community there as well. So
3 more churches. So you've currently got 3 in Portsmouth.
Yes.
So you can have 3 in Gosport.
Yeah.
6. Doubling up. Completely doubling.
And actually, again, that's really the bishop's vision. He's got this vision for how these churches in Gosport can grow and flourish and serve their local community. So actually, he's appointed me to be the team rector, but we've got these...
Team rector?
Team rector. That's an cool Anglican name, isn't it?
I love these names. Vicar, rector.
Yeah, very odd. My wife laughs at rector. She thinks it's funny.
Sounds like rectum. Is that why? I shouldn't have said that.
Yes.
Can I say that? Should I not?
We'll
said it now.
It's
on.
Out.
I don't know. Might not. Leave it in.
See how it feels.
Yeah. Anyway, carry on.
So actually, it's such a privilege to be involved because again, knowing now, it's not. It's God's church and it's God's plan. Yeah. If I can play my part in seeing people come to faith and seeing lives turned around and seeing society made more fair and more just over in Gosport, what a privilege! What a way to spend your life! Wow. It's so exciting.
Oh mate, it's amazing. It's incredible, and it's come full circle, and you're still planting, and you're doing. I think it's incredible what you guys are doing. Obviously, right now we can't ignore the fact that we are in a global pandemic. Coronavirus is all anyone talks about, and it's just all over the news. And we've kind of come out of lockdown, but localized lockdowns are happening. And you guys have just relaunched Sundays, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Can you talk to me about I've seen various people talk about lockdown lessons, things they've learned through that. But as a church, now that you're kind of, I guess we're still in it, but you're trying to find a way to navigate it and you're beginning to meet together again. Could you just talk to us a bit about what you've experienced there, what you're noticing from it, any changes, anything like that? Just talk a bit towards that.
Oh, I hated lockdown. It wasn't the life for me, Rye. I hated it. I am an extrovert. I love people. I like my kids more when they're at school.
Well, I had a baby in lockdown.
Yes, you had a baby in lockdown.
I've got a lockdown baby.
Yeah, kids are better when they're going to school every day, not when they're stuck in the house with me. And I'm better when I go to work every day and I sort of see people and I need a hamster wheel to get the energy out. But I had a really difficult time actually, and I went into lockdown. Again, I don't ever seem to learn my lesson, but I thought, this is just about how much of the church will be left when we come out of this. And I felt I sort of slipped into panic mode of what can I do to hold the church together. And then I went for a walk actually, and so my Boris walk every day, I'd go down to the seafront with my headphones in and I'd listen to some worship and then I'd pray. And I remember saying, are you kidding, Lord, that you're not going to end this? Knowing that you can end this, are you kidding me that you're not going to? Because my church is going to fall apart. So what are you going to do about it? And then I felt sort of God say, you can have like a paddy, but I've got a plan here.
Come on.
And I was like, well, if you can demonstrate to me, Lord, all right, if you're saying you've got a plan, if you can demonstrate to me that more people will come to faith when we're in lockdown, more churches will be revitalized and more churches will come back to life and we'll end up with a fairer, more just society, then I'm willing to stay in lockdown. Otherwise, I'm not having it. And I felt God say, well, firstly, not your choice. But secondly, do you think I'm not capable of doing that in lockdown? Wow. Do you think that this is a problem for me? Yeah. And at that moment, I really, I sort of handed over to God and I felt like, okay, Lord, do whatever you can. And it was then that we ran our biggest Alpha course. We had 72 couples on the marriage course. Wow. Our food bank went from 1 session a week to 5 sessions a week. We started cooking meals for the domestic abuse refugees in Portsmouth. We started helping clients with who are in unmanageable debt. And we run this thing called CAP, Christians Against Poverty. Last week, our first client became completely debt-free. Actually, looking back now, we can see just how much God did during lockdown. And when I feel nervous about a second wave or what might happen, I've got to hold on to remembering God is always faithful and he will always work for the good of those who love him. And it might be painful and it might be a sacrifice. And actually the truth is I didn't enjoy church in lockdown as much as I enjoy church normally. No. And I felt like God say, hey, it might not be about you and your enjoyment. But actually I did see him do all those amazing things and I did see incredible progress for the kingdom. And so when I think now about am I fearful, am I frightened about the future, I've got to hold on and believe every time we've hit a challenge, God has been faithful and God has been good.
Come on.
So we launched our services again in real life last Sunday. We launched 3 morning services. This Sunday we're adding 2 evening services, and then next Sunday another afternoon service. So we reckon we need to do 6 to sort of like make it COVID secure and safe.
Wow.
But actually it was amazing. And you know, I was nervous because we can't sing. We have to wear masks and we can't sing. But actually the worship was incredible. Being in the rooms, like other people's faith lifting you up and your expectancy rising again. Like it was amazing. To be completely honest, I can't wait until we can all sort of cuddle each other again and like get in the mosh pit.
Though.
I'm a hugger.
You're a bit of a hugger.
You're not like that. Yeah.
No,
it's not for you. But
I'm okay with this at the moment.
Yeah, it's good for my wife Liz. She's like, elbow bumps enough for me. I don't need any more than that. But so even though it's painful for us, and actually I had this picture. The church, one of the churches we lead in Portsmouth is our Copner location, and during the war it was bombed. And Portsmouth was bombed quite heavily during the war. And in 1942, this German bomber dropped a bomb on the church. He was aiming for a railway bridge. And it landed on the church, and the church was half completely destroyed. And I was there the other day, and as I was praying in the building, I looked up at the ceiling. I could see you can sort of see the join where they rebuilt it. And by 1952, it was completely rebuilt. And now it's, you would never know really, apart from that small join. And I felt God say to me, I've rebuilt this church before. Do you not think that I can do it again?
Wow, come on.
And I was like, that's really good. But also I felt him say, it also cost that group of people in the 40s and 50s a lot of time, hard work, effort and sacrifice. He said, it will cost you the same.
Yeah, come on.
But imagine what you can see. And I think that's the call on us right now, is that will we play our part? Will we sacrifice our time, our finances, our energy to build God's kingdom in a world that has been devastated by coronavirus? And that's what we're excited about doing in Portsmouth.
Come on. Wow, mate, that's amazing. I've one more question.
Okay.
You know, we are a new plant. We've just moved here to Cardiff from Portsmouth. We were in Portsmouth I was for the last 4 years. And for anyone else starting out, whether it's a church, starting out a business, whatever they're doing, you're now 4 years in, so a bit more seasoned. So is there anything now that you wish you'd known back then that you do know now? Is there anything you can give us some advice on as we're like just starting out, or for anyone else just starting out?
That's such a helpful question. I think 4 years in, I will say is we've not had that long to learn our lessons. And so I reckon that God's got so much more to teach us. And one of the top tips is like speak to Liz and I think that in our marriage, want to speak to people who've married 50 years. We've been married 10 and so I want to speak to someone who's had a successful marriage for 50 years. So I'm spending more time actually trying to meet with people who are much further along the line. One thing I would say is I think it's supposed to be fun. I think it's supposed to enjoy it. And I think that like God wants us to enjoy this world he created. And so we take time to be on the beach, and we take time to like laugh and not take ourselves too seriously. We make sure that we take Jesus seriously, but we definitely don't take ourselves too seriously.
Lots of spike ball.
A lot of spike ball, our favourite game. A lot of fun, a lot of volleyball. But you know what? It is. I think that God's given us this chance to be involved in his mission, and he's done it for our good. He's done it so he can draw us closer to him, and so that we can enjoy his presence in his. And Archie, who's the leader of St. Peter's Brighton, said, what if church planting was actually an activity in seeing how you might become more like Jesus, in seeing how you might experience more of God's goodness. And everything else is a bonus. Then I think if you position yourself like that, then you can't really go wrong. Oh, man.
Mate, thank you so much for coming on.
I love it.
Mate, you're amazing. Thank you.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
So nice to be here.
Thank you.